Okay, welcome everybody to our Call IS Electronic Village sessions at TESOL 2021 at the virtual conference. This is our live Q&A for our tech fairs that are recorded on Flipgrid. So you will have to go to our Electronic Village website and you'll find our Flipgrid links. So in case you haven't watched them yet, please go check those out. The title of our sessions is Making Your LMS or Learning Management System Work for You, Lessons Learned and Effective Practices. And I have two of our panelists here in our live Q&A, and I am going to stop sharing my screen so Catherine Clemens can share her screen and give us a quick recap of what her session is all about, and then we'll have time for some questions. Catherine, take it away.
Okay, thank you. So my session was about online teacher training in resource-limited environments, lessons from Mexico. I'm Catherine Clements. I'm a teaching specialist at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis in the United States. And in summer of 2020, I worked as an English language specialist for the Department of State. And I did a 5-week intensive teacher training course for students throughout Mexico. And these students were graduates of the Access program. Access teaches English language skills to anyone who wants to learn them, to young people. And after their 2-year course, they were eligible to take my class, which would teach them the basics of English language teaching. The class was supposed to be in person. Due to the pandemic, it was moved online, and the Department of State thought that they would have about 30 or 40 people interested, but in the virtual format, almost 100 people signed up. So my task was to find an LMS that would work for a large group of people throughout the country in a lot of different contexts. Some people had laptops, some people had phones, some people had good internet access all the time, some people had more intermittent internet access. So with all those considerations in mind, I decided to use Google Classroom for our course. And I have used Canvas, I've used Moodle, I've used Blackboard. I had never used Google Classroom before this, but when thinking about the learning management system I wanted something that was easy to use, free, available into perpetuity for all the participants, and also one that would allow collaboration. And Google Classroom has all of these things. So I started by creating the course. The learning management system was really just a way to have all the materials available to people. And it was also a way for us to get to the Google Suite, because students would use the Google Suite. They'd use Google Docs for collaboration. But the class met synchronously twice a week for 3 hours at a time, and most of the work was done in class. There was very little homework. So the class itself was, and I used Zoom for the class, but you could use Google Hangouts, Google Meet for it. And in the class, I would lecture for a bit about the topic of the week, whether it was American culture or pragmatics or second language acquisition. We moved through 5 different topics. And after I did my lecturing, then the students would work together in groups to create lesson plans. And the lesson plans were developed, again, using Google Docs, but the students chatted about them as they were working on them. And they put all the information they needed for the lesson plan right in the Google Doc. So any videos, any handouts, anything was in there. It was in the Google Doc. And then the next week, they presented the lesson plan live. Again, this was on Zoom, but you could use any method for this. And One group would present and the other group would act as students. And then they switched off and they gave each other feedback about what went well and what could use more development. And then at the end of this 5-week class, with 4 groups of about 23 or 24 students each, but at the end of this class, there was a huge repository of lesson plans, that have all had been, very well thought out, very well developed, all ready to go for the students to use in the future as they began or as they continued their English language teaching journey. So I was thrilled with how well the Google Suite did for this. Google Classroom was very easy to navigate. The students were mostly already familiar with Google Docs, and they they all did so well in the class. I highly recommend Google Classroom for anyone who wants to teach a very large group of students or students in in these maybe low resource environments. So
Thank
that's
you,
that's Google
Catherine.
Docs or Google
I
Classroom.
apologize. I didn't realize that my mic was open and my dog is snoring behind me. So that's what you might have been hearing. I apologize. Um, so I have a couple questions for you. So
Mhm.
first of all, was there anything that Google Classroom did not do well for teacher training? And also maybe what were some challenges that you or your students faced using Google Classroom?
So one of the reasons I chose Google Classroom was because Google was probably already familiar to the students in some way. And I found that to be very true, perhaps too true, because the students, most of them had Google accounts ahead of time. I'd say 75% of them had an account. And then the remaining 25%, we told them ahead of time they needed to get a free Google account, and we sent out information about how to do this. But then when the time came that I was looking at my class lists for these 4 different classes, I saw a lot of nicknames and I didn't know who they belonged to. So there are a lot of people with names like, the big dog or Sam the man, and I didn't know who the big dog was in real life. So, and then there were also a lot of goofy avatars that went along with these nicknames. So this was a good opportunity for me to talk to my students about developing a professional self, perhaps changing that nickname, changing that avatar, and we worked with it, but for the first couple weeks, I had a hard time figuring out who my students really were. Another thing with Google Classroom, it doesn't work as seamlessly as Canvas or Moodle with groups. So I had to manually create group assignments. And that took a lot of time when I was doing work with, again, with a large group and 4 different classes. So it was tedious to assign something to one group, but not to the other 3 groups because that's how you have to do it. So yeah, but that's really one of the few drawbacks to it, and that's the only thing that I would like to see changed in future versions.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Welcome.
Um, so is there anything else you would want to change about using Google other than the group settings?
Um, it it's not beautiful, it's not elegant, but it's very user friendly. So um, I think that if you want an aesthetically pleasing experience, this might not be the LMS for you, but I was okay with that, all things considered, especially since it I found it very easy for everyone to get to, even the people who had this, had internet connection problems. So I think that the bare bones approach really does have its advantages.
In my district, we also use Google Classroom. We were using it for the whole district, and then last year we switched to elementary was using Google Classrooms, and middle
Mhm.
and high school we're using Schoology.
Mhm.
But next year we're going full on Schoology. So
Okay.
we're kind of dropping our Google Classroom. And I think one of the reasons is I don't think you can connect it up to your student information system. So it does not sync up with the grade book. So when you were using it, were you giving grades? Does it have like a grade book feature in Google Classroom that you're aware of?
I'm glad you asked that because so for the University of Minnesota, I have a Gmail account, but our institutional Gmail account doesn't include the Google Suite, or it doesn't include Classroom. So I myself had to create a separate Gmail account so that I could access all of the Classroom features. And this class, since it was done through Access, it had grades, but it wasn't tied in to an official grading system. There was an attendance requirement, and students needed to get a 70% or higher in order to pass the class, but it wasn't connected to an institution's grading. So that's one consideration. I think if you're doing this as part of a school, you have to check to see if the school has all of these features available. But if your school's already using Canvas or Moodle or another LMS, you might not be able to do this officially. So that is an important consideration.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thanks, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Okay, Jennifer LaCroix, I have made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen now. So if you would like to give us like a 5-minute recap of your session, and then I'll have some questions for you as well.
Okay, thank you. So let me just pull up the presenter view here. One moment, please. Okay, so my session on Flipgrid is on the power of prosody, listening to Amanda Gorman's authentic speech. I'm a senior lecturer at Boston University. I teach in the Global Programs Department. So I'm primarily working with international students at the undergraduate and graduate levels who are trying to become fully matriculated university students. As part of global programs, we offer the Center for English Language and Orientation Programs, known as CELOP. And this past semester, I was teaching in CELOP in a low intermediate reading and writing class. So why prosody and why reading? Because you would think that prosody, otherwise known as suprasegmental level stress, the rhythm of our language and how we use these ups and downs that are a little bit more dramatic for some students who tend to come from an intonation pattern that's a bit flatter. So I used Amanda Gorman's, as we know, she gave the presidential inauguration um, reading this past January. And so there was a lot of media attention surrounding her. So it was easy to find articles about Amanda Gorman to do a little background research and to build students' background knowledge. And we spent a lot of time in class talking about Amanda Gorman's background, listening to her read her poems via video. And then the platforms that I used are Blackboard Ultra. That's the program that my institution uses as our LMS. And I use something within Blackboard Ultra called Perusal. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Perusal is a tool that allows you to upload authentic articles or individual readings or something in the form of a PDF or a Word document. And what's great about Perusal in Blackboard is that it allows some kind of level of interaction between the student and the teacher and students. So I was uploading documents about Amanda Gorman's background. I was uploading examples of her poems, and students could type in their questions. They could annotate the reading via Perusal. They could ask vocabulary questions. They could answer each other's vocabulary questions. Receive primary stress. That means those words are louder, longer, higher, and clearer. And I could highlight which words that I thought that the students should stress, as they were reading the poems out loud later in the semester. This was helpful because students could build their background knowledge about her, work through their understanding of the poetry, listen to her. And what I was really trying to do was raise their awareness again about how prosody has these really big, dramatic contours in English, right? Our rhythm isn't flat, it's this up, down, up, down. Sometimes we use these fall, rise, pitch contours to suggest that we mean something other than what we're saying, right? And so, how you draw this pragmatic awareness or bring attention to this to students from another language background can be very challenging for teachers. The students don't always buy into it. They think you're just being silly, or they sound silly if they try to sound a certain way. So to tie into perusal, they could see the poems, we could interact, color code the poems, give each other feedback on word meanings and stress patterns. Then I used the voice thread, the voice memo. That's a feature of the iPhone. Almost all the students in my class had a phone or access to the voice memo feature. If not, I came up with another way for them to record themselves. But why I use voice memo is it's similar to Prot, but more user-friendly for the student, and that you can actually see those fall, rise, pitch contours. You can see in the decihertz how the voice of Amanda Gorman goes up and down. So in my slides, what I demonstrate in my video is I took screenshots of a certain stanza of the poem where you can see Gorman's pitch really going up and down, and it's far more dramatic. And I compared it to the students' recordings of that same stanza of the poem, and they could see where their pitch was a bit less dramatic, a little more flat. So they knew they had something to work towards in order to sound more authentic. And this wasn't just about speaking, because you can obviously be very comprehensible without doing these dramatic fall, rise, pitch contours, but it was actually to help improve their listening so that they could understand that there's a lot of meaning embedded in what we say as English speakers. It's not just what we say, but how we say it that conveys true meaning. So I use Blackboard Ultra, I use Perusal, and I use the voice memo recording on the phone to help bring students awareness to the prosody of English.
Excellent. Thank you for that, that quick recap. Yeah, I just also used Amanda Gorman's poem in a speaking and listening exercise, getting our students ready for their annual access test, which is the test they take that measures their English language proficiency growth from one year to the next. And that was the listening activity. And then they had to prepare a short speech about it. So I think that's a topic that's really exciting right now, and an amazing young poet as well. Wonderful. Okay, Catherine. Yeah. So Catherine wrote in the chat that she just watched in her class a speech that Amanda Gorman gave called Roar. I can only imagine how wonderful that is too. So Jennifer, were your students coming, like, were they in the classroom with you, or was this a remote or a hybrid type learning situation?
It's hybrid. So Boston University has been using an LFA, which means learn from anywhere model. That means most of the class is synchronous, with half of the time in person and half the time remote. So what this means to me as a teacher is that 3 days a week, I'm actually in the classroom, and half the students in the class are in the room with me, and the other half are signing in remotely. And because they're international, not all of them have been able to travel to the United States in order to attend classes, which we know has been a big challenge. So this was a way to kind of level the playing field and create a more equitable experience for our students. So 3 days a week, everything was synchronous. They were with me. Things that were asynchronous, where I would post things to Blackboard that I expected them to respond to via a discussion thread, or I expected them to upload a video about themselves, or I expected them to use Perusal and annotate the reading, ask each other vocabulary questions, answer those questions if they had that knowledge, if they could. Also to point out areas in the reading where they were having difficulty. this is one of our biggest challenges as language teachers. Is it's one thing to use a textbook where everything's already been skillfully adapted for different levels of learners, but to bring in that real authentic language and to have time to scaffold it and have time as a teacher to prepare that authentic reading can be a real challenge. So perusal is nice because I didn't have to build in pulling out what I thought would be their vocabulary questions and pre-teaching the vocabulary. I didn't have to come up with reading comprehension questions. I wasn't using it as a summative assessment in any form. I was using it as a way to be involved in the during process. So as they're building their literacy skills, it's also very important to improve their listening skills, right? As a lot of the research indicates, listening is actually the primary skill that we need to attend to for second language learners. Everything in the mode and medium in which we operate is by listening first and foremost. So I'm always trying to increase attention to how we can build their listening skills. And that doesn't mean just full comprehension. It doesn't mean just giving them multiple choice questions and testing them, but it means how can we pay attention to that during listening process? And so much of that is through pragmatic stress and intonation patterns that are very unique. So what was great about this is I could use something authentic and I could see their during reading questions, and it was very interactive and involved. Otherwise, I would just have to test them. So the other 2 days of the week were fully remote, again, synchronous, but everyone signed in from home, from their home computers. But I try to blend what I do in the classroom synchronously with some small task that I expect them to do asynchronously. So it's an LFA model that we use at BU, and it's a bit of a hybrid model.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop your share so we're all back together here. I have a question for like both of you. And you both touched on this, so maybe if you could just focus a little more on it, especially for this, for the remote pieces where students were working remotely. I know, Catherine, you mentioned that students worked on Google Docs together, which is something you can work on remotely and collaborate with each other. And Jennifer, you mentioned that they were using the perusal to kind of interact, working with the same document. But can each one of you give like another example or expand on that example of how the students could collaborate with each other and nevertheless being in this remote environment? Catherine, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, using Zoom, or you could use anything for this, I would put students into breakout rooms in order to work on their lesson plans. And their groups for teaching were based on the context in which they hoped to teach. So before the class started, I sent them a survey and I said, do you think you'll be teaching in a city? Do you think you'll be teaching in the country? Do you think you'll be teaching, kids, teenagers, adults? And if they didn't know, that was fine. But based on the results of this Google survey, they were put into teaching groups. And and it was fine if they said they didn't know because these are teachers in training. So I tried to have a mix of experienced teachers and then newer teachers together. And then we would have about an hour in class when they would be able to collaborate on their lesson plans. And so I put them in the breakout rooms and then I visited each breakout room. And there were times when I would visit a breakout room and it was silent. And I said, what's going on, guys? And they said, well, we're talking on WhatsApp or WhatsApp. It's like, okay, whatever works. If this is what you prefer, then you can do it. And the video on, video off, it didn't matter. The only rule was that, if I called on them, they had to respond because I didn't want anyone just going into a breakout room and then walking away. But I felt like having these groups doing the work together, it made them accountable to each other. And I was just so impressed with the quality of the work that came out of this. They really produced professional lesson plans. And the lesson plan template, I show it in the Flipgrid video. I provided a template for them and it was pretty tightly controlled. So they didn't have complete leeway for everything, but it was, what's your warm up, what's your before, during, after, what's your assessment, what's your wrap up. And so they had to have all of these parts in their lesson plan. But then what I found was the students sort of divided this up and said, I'll do the intro and you do the explanation and then you do the assessment part. And so they were able to collaborate that way on that. So does that answer your question?
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Jennifer, can you kind of give another example or more in depth of how your students were able to collaborate with each other?
Sure. So I build collaboration into almost everything I do. I intentionally set up in my PowerPoint slides that I'm using regular breaks where I have a circle. I insert an image that says take 5, and that means go into your breakout room. Here's a task, or here's some discussion questions, report back. So they're constantly collaborating. I also regularly upload examples from their writing into a Word document, things that I find errors in, and I upload to one main document that I upload into the chat, or I attach it to Blackboard and ask them to either download it. And then they work in breakout rooms to find their own errors, doing peer editing and correcting them. Then they report back as a whole class how they did. I share my screen. We talk through together the changes to their writing they can do to improve the grammar and vocabulary. Separately, they do a lot of collaboration in terms of video making. So one of the first tasks I usually do at the beginning of the semester is I have them do something in terms of an intercultural communication task. They have to prepare someone who will be visiting their countries, both of their countries, for the first time to do business. They've never been there before. They have to use modal verbs to give advice of what that person should do in terms of behavior. And then they co-create a short 1 to 2 minute video, no more, using like the iMovie feature or the Kaltura feature in Blackboard. And they upload that and we watch those short video clips in class. So they have to collaborate in order to decide, is one person doing the voiceover or both of them doing the voiceover. They have to make these decisions together, and often they want me to tell them what they have to do. And that's part of the learning experience. No, you have to negotiate this. This is intercultural communication. Work this out. You decide. And so that's also kind of an eye-opening experience in terms of working with people from different backgrounds, is how we divide our work, right? And how we decide interculturally how to behave. So that's always a great video project. I tend to do a lot of video with the class. I also do a weekly video of myself, similar to this experience right now, where I highlight their contributions from the week. I try to highlight each student's best contribution. So if there was something really interesting they said in the discussion board and the discussion thread on Blackboard, I'll say, oh, this was so interesting what Jennifer wrote this week. Let's really look at that comment she made, and I'm going to tell you why it was interesting. Or, oh, Catherine did a great job with her vocabulary chart this week. I'm going to show you a picture of that really great vocabulary chart. So I do a Zoom video where I've embedded the highlights in a PowerPoint, and I zip that out to them every Sunday at the beginning of the week, so that they have an overview of what they've done that they did really well that I highlight. And I present an overview of what's to come. And I find that really helps build community, because they see that I'm using a positive reinforcement coaching model, and they feel, I think, more comfortable when they do make mistakes in class. And I always let them know there are no mistakes, right? Just opportunities to learn here. So I find it creates a more relaxed environment where we can actually kind of dig into what their challenges are or issues and work on them in a very pragmatic way.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So let me just flash our share my screen and flash our final slide. Here we go. So this was the live Q&A for making your LMS work for you. And we had Catherine Clements with us and Jennifer LaCroix. So please visit our Electronic Village website. You can find us from the homepage of the TESOL conference website by clicking on the little plug icon all the way at the bottom on the left. to find some of our other sessions. Our Flipgrid sessions from both of these speakers, as well as all of our others, are available on that website. So please go check them all out. And in case you missed us live, we will be on the Call IS YouTube channel, which you can see here on your screen. So thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to stop the recording now.